The talk you are about to hear is by Roshi Amala Wrightson, teacher at the Auckland Zen Centre.
Today is the 23rd of July 2024, and we're going to start looking at a Mahayana teaching called the Four Nutriments. We probably won't get finished this evening. There might be one more or two more talks after that. We're going to be reading and commenting on passages from Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet by Thich Nhat Hanh. We've looked at some passages earlier in the book, and it's got some very useful material in it. And I said then we would come back to it, and we are now. This was recently published, I think posthumously, though it's couched as if maybe it was on completion or near completion when Thich Nhat Hanh had his stroke that prevented him from teaching any further in that way. And this teaching of the four nutriments, it's a Mahayana teaching, not so much a teaching from the Zen tradition, but from the wider Mahayana school. You could say, or people do say, that the only teaching transmitted in Zen is see into your true nature. Red Pine, in his commentary on the Platform Sutra, says of the see your nature, this is the only teaching transmitted in Zen. The rest is merely window dressing. Our nature includes every thought, every feeling, every memory, every atom of our bodies, and every dharma of our minds, all of which are empty of self-existence. To see their emptiness is to see our nature. The only difference between Buddhas and deluded beings is this. Buddhas see the emptiness of their nature, and deluded beings see the walls of their delusions. In the Heart Sutra, Avalokiteshvara says, all dharmas are defined by emptiness, not birth or destruction, purity or defilement, completeness or deficiency. It's a little bit different from our translation, but how does it go? Dharmas here are empty, all are the primal void. None are born or die, nor are they stained or pure, nor do they wax or wane. This is the fundamental teaching of Buddhism and certainly of Zen. Emptiness is our nature, and our nature is emptiness. The Chinese character used here is qian, which not only means to see, but also to experience. Thus, to see our nature is to experience our nature, to experience its emptiness. So, going on that basis, we might possibly be times when we need not just this transcendent wisdom, but also skillful means, upaya, working more from say, the relative point of view. And this is what these four nutriments are, you could say, skillful means. And they arise here in the in the context of our response to climate breakdown and other crises that we're experiencing in the last years. And it's taught here on the basis of that if we're going to care for others effectively, we need to know how to take care of ourselves. And that's what this teaching is really about, is how do we take care of ourselves so that we are in a position then to care for others. And this chapter is headed up, Right Fuel, Guard Your Mind, Nurture Your Aspiration. And Thich Nhat Hanh says here, the well-being of the planet depends on the well-being of your own body and mind. Just as the well-being of your mind and body depends on the well-being of the planet, and so protecting the planet has to do with our way of consuming. If you cannot deal with the problem of pollution and loss of balance in yourself, how can you deal with the problem of pollution and loss of balance in nature? The teaching of interbeing here is very important. And note here that this section is headed up, what are you feeding? So the teaching here in this 4 nutriments is that what we eat is what we feed. Might seem contradictory, but what we in a sense assimilate into ourselves, we give power to that. And so it can be nutriments that are healthy or nutriments which are unhealthy. He goes on, we suffer because we have been consuming the wrong kind of food. We are ruining our planet with our way of consuming, and our children risk suffering deeply. You could say we're already suffering. So the way to save our planet is to practice mindful consumption. Otherwise, humankind will continue to ruin our planet and create a lot of suffering, not only for other beings, but also for other species on Earth. So this teaching is about the practice of mindful consumption, but it's about much, much more than just what we eat and drink. It's made up of 4 different aspects. First is the obvious one, edible foods, what we eat and drink. The second one is everything we experience with our senses. In other words, images, sounds, tastes, smells, touch, also books, films, websites, music, all of these things that we assimilate through our 5 senses and the intellect. The third nutriment is volitions, what our deepest intentions are. And this is one we're going to look at in more detail this evening. And then the fourth one is consciousness, the ways in which we experience things mediated by our consciousness, whether that's individual consciousness or collective consciousness. And we'll get to explore that eventually, not tonight. Just a footnote on these 4 nutriments. It's some people may have recognized that they're very closely aligned with the 5 skandhas. And I wonder if they were derived from the 5 skandhas, which are form, feeling, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. And the form is our body, so that's rupa, skandha, and the first of these 5 nutrients. And then the one about our senses seems to be related to the the second and third, feeling and perceptions. Feeling is everything pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Perceptions is how we recognize these things and lodge them in our memories. And then mental formations, there's the samkara, skandha, which really is, it includes volition in it, which is one of these nutriments. And then finally vijnana skandha, consciousness, which is the same as the fourth nutriment is the same as the fifth skandha. So really, you could say what we're talking about here, if you want to simplify it down, boil it down, it's body and mind. What do we assimilate into our body, into our minds? And the body and the mind in Buddhist teaching is taught as being made up of these 5 skandhas, these 5 aggregations of stuff, you could say. And it's these 5 skandhas that we mistake for a self as something permanent and solid and separate, especially separate. It's a cause of much suffering. One of my favorite ways of describing these 5 skandhas comes from Tibetan Buddhism, the perishing collection. All of it we take for being solid, but in fact it's the whole lot of it is insubstantial and shifting. This is what Kalu Rinpoche says about these 5 skandhas. In our present human condition, there are 5 skandhas. The physical existence plus the 4 purely mental states of sensation, perception, mental forces, formations, and full discursive consciousness, which is able to decide this is a sound, this is a form, and to arrive at value judgments, this is good, this is bad, and so on. The word skandha literally means a heap or pile, and one understanding of the term is that as long as we have physical existence, we not only have these 5 aggregates, but also a heap of trouble. So there's this, our attachment to them is a big source of our suffering. So there's the skandhas are sort of lurking in the background of this teaching about what we assimilate, what we consume. And we start with the third one on the list, volitions. And perhaps this one is at the top of the list because our volitions have the power to shape all of the others. They're very fundamental. We'll see how. Back to Thich Nhat Hanh, he says, the Buddha said nothing can survive without food. And he also said, when we suffer, we blame the outside, and we blame other people we think make us suffer. But looking deeply, we find out that our enemy number 1 is ourselves. We are the ones who make ourselves suffer the most by the way we consume, the way we eat, the way we drink, the way we organize our life, the way we behave, even by our way of chasing after our ideas of happiness. We are the ones who create our own suffering. We are our own worst enemy. That's what the Buddha said. In many ways, we are responsible for our own suffering. We may have thought that something is good for us, and yet it makes us suffer a lot. It reminded me of this, something that Shantideva said, the great Vajrayana saint. He said, those desiring to escape from suffering hasten right towards suffering. With the very desire for happiness, out of delusion, they destroy their own happiness as if it were an enemy. Those desiring to escape from suffering, hasten right towards suffering. We do this because we don't see clearly, we don't see deeply enough into our suffering to really understand its roots. But Thich Nhat Hanh says it's possible to end our suffering. Your fear, anger and hatred can be ended. We can train ourselves to see our ill-being in terms of nutriment. As soon as we can recognize whatever is the source of nutriment for our ill-being, we just cut it off and our suffering will cease. It has no more fuel and it will die. So the key is to take away the fuel that drives our suffering. And this teaching of the four nutriments is one way of conceptualizing this process. So looking now at this volition. What do we want to do with our life? We have to sit down and look deeply to find out. Is your deepest desire to run after fame, power, success, wealth, and sensual stimulation? Or is it something else? For a terrorist, the deepest desire is to punish and to kill. For an ecologist, their deepest desire is to protect the environment. So this is something that is valuable to do, to really ask ourselves what is the most important to us, and are we putting our energy there? Because whatever our preoccupations we are, if we put our energy there, then those preoccupations will shape who we are. We all have desire, and our desire can be healthy or unhealthy. It can make us suffer or it can make us happy. Is our deepest desire healthy or not? This is another really useful question to ask. If our deepest desire is to suffer less and to be happier, if our deepest desire is to come back to ourselves, to create joy and happiness, and nourish ourselves and help others to do the same, if our deepest desire is to learn how to embrace and transform our suffering, we can suffer less and help others do the same, then that is good. That is a good aspiration. That is in fact bodhicitta, the best kind of volition. We start in practice. We start with ourselves, alleviating our own suffering, and then we can, as we suffer less and have more insight into our own suffering, then we can help others to do the same. You can't help somebody else, save them from drowning if you're drowning yourself. There has to be this learning to swim, we could say. We know there is suffering in ourselves and in the world. We want to do something, to be something, to help reduce the amount of suffering that there is there. But we may feel helpless because the amount of suffering is so overwhelming. And alone, it doesn't seem we can do much. We can't bear to live anymore, even though we maybe still be very young. I think he's saying we can't bear to live anymore, but he's talking about young people. And there is a lot of mental illness around, which may come in part out of this response to our suffering and the world's suffering is overwhelming. When the Buddha was young, he had the same feeling. He saw the suffering and he saw that even if you're a king, there's not much you can do to alleviate that suffering. And so he chose not to become a king, turned his back on the royal court, and tried to find another way. And that motivated him to become a monk, to practice. It was the desire to help people to suffer less. Once we can transform the suffering in ourselves, we'll be able to help transform the suffering in the world. It's very simple, very clear, and that is what the Buddha did. We practice not to avoid suffering nor to avoid society, but to get the strength we need to cope and to help. And we learn that although alone we cannot do much, with a community we can do something. That is why the first thing the Buddha did after enlightenment was to look around for the elements to build a sangha, and he was an excellent sangha builder. Over the past decades, I have also learned to build the sangha. This is Thich Nhat writing. When I met Martin Luther King Jr., he used the words beloved community to describe the sangha, our spiritual community. This beloved community is something I think we can draw inspiration from and learn from. This comes from Martin Luther King Jr., and he talked about the beloved community as the aftermath of non-violence. So in other words, what could arise after we relinquish to some degree our violence. Then this beloved community became possible. And he saw it as a society in which caring and compassion drive policies, and that the policies support the universal elimination of poverty and hunger and all forms of bigotry and violence. So this was his dream. And it can be part of our dream. A community, a society based on compassion. When I was a young monk, the suffering in Vietnam was overwhelming. Millions of people died. And how can you help? You are overwhelmed by the suffering, and yet you want to do something to help end the war. My friends and colleagues, including Sister Chan Kong, who was still a young student of that time, did everything they could to help relieve the suffering of those who were poor and oppressed. But it wasn't enough. The war continued to destroy so much. And so they began to engage in peace activities, and Sister Chan Kun got arrested. I also suffered as a result of my efforts to bring peace. 40 years of exile because I dared to do something to help bring the war to an end. 40 years of exile. But we had to do something, otherwise we could never have survived, either physically or mentally. We go insane if we can't do something. Again, we think of the world situation that we have now with with what seem like intractable wars in Ukraine and in Palestine. It is a natural impulse in us to want to alleviate that suffering, and to, in a way, to completely ignore those impulses is a form of mental illness. We partake of the collective mental illness of war itself. For all of us today, it is the same. Our planet is in danger. There is so much violence, so much suffering going on in the world. You go crazy. But you want to do something. First of all, just to survive, and then to help reduce the suffering. You aspire to do something. You desire something. And you need that kind of desire in order to have enough energy to sustain yourself. Your deepest desire is not just to have money, social recognition, influence or success and so forth. What you really want is something more. I think some people can get the wrong impression that they shouldn't have any desires. But desire is part of the Eightfold Path, you could say. The second element of that path is right aspiration. And aspiration is another way of talking about our desires, our motives for things. Maybe you want to change the direction of civilization. Maybe you want to help people take care of themselves and their suffering so that they can heal and transform, live deeply with joy and happiness, and help the earth restore her beauty. That is a good desire, a good source of nutriment. That is bodhicitta, the mind of love. And if you are a politician, an activist, or a corporate leader, and you have that kind of good intention, good volition, you can reverse the direction of our civilization. You can reverse the direction our civilization is going in. And these altruistic desires and aspirations can sustain us through difficulties because they're so big and universal, and because they touch us so deeply, they can really sustain us and through difficulties in a way that less wide-ranging aspirations may not be able to. He goes on, there are desires that can destroy you, your body and your mind, but there are also desires that can give you a lot of strength, an aspiration, a vow. And as a young person, you need that kind of food. Of course, we have our own suffering, but as soon as we have a strong aspiration, we are ready to do something. Seeing the suffering in the world, right away we feel that the suffering is in us is not the most important thing, and we suffer less right away. And that is why this kind of nutriment, this kind of food is very important. To be able to put our own suffering into perspective can make a huge difference. The Dalai Lama talks about how we can contemplate the fact that we ourselves is completely outnumbered by others. 8 billion plus others, and just one of us. This can be liberating. And when you have this kind of desire in you, your eyes shine brighter and your smile is more beautiful and your steps become more firm. And that strong desire is a kind of nutriment, the kind of food that you need. And when we come together as a community with a collective aspiration, we have the energy we need to realize what we want to realize. And we take refuge in a community, not for our own sake, but for the sake of everyone, because without community we can't go far. And this is where the third treasure comes in, Sangha, that we can do very little on our own, but when we come together, we can create something. We can create, like here, the Zen Center, hopefully an island of sanity, somewhere where helpers can come to rejuvenate, to recharge their batteries. We've talked about this before. He goes on, you know what to do. You have to master the techniques of mindfulness, concentration, and insight, because the next generation needs you. Your time is for that. Every moment is an opportunity for us to train, to transform ourselves, to prepare ourselves to serve the world. We have no time to waste on things that are not really important. Our path is very clear. We have to have something to do, and we know that if we can do it, we can help reduce the suffering of the world. Even though I am of advanced age, I have been able to keep my aspiration alive. I'm still young in spirit, and I want to transmit that energy to my students. Get the appropriate kind of food and build community together. This is something we can look at together as a community now, having reached our 20th year, is what do we want to see ourselves do in the next 10 years? How can we further build community, create a beloved community together? And he goes on to talk about bodhisattva, Kshitigarbha. This bodhisattva we know more readily as Jizo Bosatsu. He says, any bodhisattva, any great being, always has a tremendous source of energy in them. If you don't yet have an aspiration, you need to find it. You should sit down with your partner, with your friends, and inquire about each other's deepest dreams. If you share the same kind of aspiration, your relationship will get stronger. We are here, alive, and we all want to do something with our life. We want our life to be useful, meaningful. Somewhere the Dalai Lama says that it's not a question of what is the meaning of life, or whether life has meaning or not even, but it's a question of how do we give it a meaning through our actions, through our attitudes. Its meaning is something that co-arises between us and the world. There is a bodhisattva whose name is Kshitigarbha. The vow of Kshitigarbha is to go to the places where there is a lot of suffering in order to serve and to help. There are little hells a little bit everywhere on the planet. Sometimes hell may be in our own family, in our own community, or in our nation. We are hating each other, we're killing each other. We're using bombs and guns to kill each other. We belong to the same family, the same nation, the same community, the same culture, and yet we make a hell for each other. Kshitigarbha is ready to go to these areas and help. It's very difficult. You have to be fresh. You have to be patient and persevering. You have to be armed with non-fear. And you come not to blame, but to help stop the fear, the anger, the violence. You come to offer understanding and compassion and to help others generate understanding and compassion in their hearts. There are many doctors, nurses and social workers who are living Kshitigarbhas. They volunteer to be present in painful spots on our earth to help. So Bodhisattva Kshitigarbha is very real. They are not just an icon. Many people are serving as Bodhisattva Kshitigarbha all over the planet. They are not afraid of suffering because they know that they can bring relief. They are protected by a strong energy of compassion and aspiration. I think here an example is Doctors Without Borders. Physicians and nurses and other workers who go into war zones to treat people. Doctors Without Borders has already lost several of its workers to the conflict in Palestine, Israel. This incredible generosity in people being willing to go into these extremely dangerous places to offer help. We all really have the potential for this kind of generosity in us. If we can find, if we can connect to our deepest aspirations to help and find out in what way we can help. Not all of us go into such areas, but there are all kinds of ways of facing our hells and helping with hellish situations. For instance, writers who explore the darkest parts of human nature, human society, or teachers who go into areas where there's a great deal of suffering and obstruction to teaching in schools and so forth. You could get inspiration for unleashing our generosity in this regard from the nature of our cosmos. And some of you will have heard this passage before because I've used it a couple of times before in Teisho. This is coming from the work of Brian Swimme in a book called The Universe is a Green Dragon. And he says, emptiness is permeated with the urgency to leap forth. But the one that particularly relates to our topic is, he says, the ground of being is generosity. The ground of being is generosity. And the example that he gives is of the sun, our sun. The sun, each second, transforms 4 million tons of itself into light. Each second, a huge chunk of the sun vanishes into radiant energy that soars away in all directions. In the case of the sun, we have a new understanding of the cosmological meaning of sacrifice. The sun is, with each second, giving itself over to become energy that we, with every meal, partake of. We so rarely reflect on two basic truths of biology. We so rarely reflect on this basic truth of biology, and yet its spiritual significance is supreme. The sun converts itself into a flow of energy that photosynthesis changes into plants that are then consumed by animals. So for 4 million years, humans have been feasting on the sun's energy stored in the form of wheat or maize or reindeer. As each day the sun dies as sun and is reborn as the vitality of the earth. And those solar flares are in fact the vitality of the vast human enterprise. The sun's story will find its climax in a story from the human family, of those men and women whose lives manifested the same generosity and whose sacrifice enabled others to reach fulfillment. If through the ages the various cultures have admired such people who poured out their creative energies so that others might live, we were intuitively recognizing that those humans were true to the nature of the energy that filled them. True to the nature of the energy that filled them. Human generosity is only possible because at the center of the solar system, a magnificent stellar generosity pours forth free energy day and night without stop and without complaint and without the slightest hesitation. This is the way of the universe. This is the way of life, and this is the way in which each of us joins this cosmological lineage when we accept the sun's gift of energy and transform it into the creative action that will enable the community to flourish. He continues, in difficult situations, you have to know how to cultivate your inner artist, meditator, and warrior, the determination and fearless endurance of Kshitigarbha, so you can be balanced and steady for your people. Many decades ago, there were times when it looked like the war in Vietnam would never end. Despair was prevalent, especially among young people. I remember they would come and ask, Tay, will there ever be a day when this war is over? It didn't look like it was ever going to end. It dragged on forever and ever. It was very difficult for me to give an answer, but after breathing in and out, I said, my friends, we know everything is impermanent, and so is war. But the answer to that question is not so important. What's important is, in every situation, to find a way to cultivate compassion, calm, and clarity. If these things can be kept alive, then there is hope. The worst enemy is despair. We must keep hoping. Our practice of calming and looking deeply nourishes our hope. And with that calmness, that looking deeply, and that openness, we can grow a movement of awakening in size and quality. So many people are already ready to be something and do something for the causes of peace, of social justice, of protecting the planet. We should not feel alone. The temptation to despair and use violence is always there. But if the meditator and the artist are alive in us, then the warrior will know exactly what direction to go. Usually we say that there's no room for hope in Zen, because hope means hoping for a particular outcome or future. But another way of thinking of hope is of maintaining a sense of really not knowing how things are going to turn out. Somebody had put it like this: what we need to avoid is the arrogance of thinking we know what the future is. Well, our time is up now. There's a little bit more on this volition, but I think we'll wait until next time to give it the space it deserves. So we'll stop now and recite the 4 vows. All beings without number, I vow to liberate. Endless blind passions, I vow to uproot. Dharma gaze beyond measure, I vow to penetrate. The great way of Buddha, attain. All beings without number, I vow to liberate. Endless blind passions, I vow to uproot. Dharma gaze beyond measure, I vow to penetrate.
The teaching you have received is offered freely. If you would like to make a donation to support the continuation of this podcast service or learn more about practice opportunities at the Auckland Zen Centre, please visit www.aucklandzen.org.nz.